there are some experts in the room. Kate Hudson, from the leader of CND, for example. And I apologize to people like her if, in the course of what I have to say, I kind of state what to some people is the obvious. But it's my experience that what one thinks is obvious isn't always, at least not to everyone. And there are some mistakes that are being made on Twitter and Facebook and in discourse that I'm seeing around the place that I want to insist that we must correct. And I'm going to start with the most obvious of those. Our battle here, our conflict, our struggle here is not against Jews. There are far too many people whose intentions hitherto may not have been in any way ill, but they're putting up foolish pictures of Hitler or of Netanyahu dressed in a Hitler uniform, or worse than that even, saying things like, well, now we know why Hitler did what he did. This is completely unacceptable, and some of you may know I have been remorselessly blocking on Twitter anyone who even vaguely touches the space across the line which is acceptable. This is really, really important for two reasons. First of all, Hitlerism, fascism, is the worst, most poisonous, most murderous, most genocidal ideology that ever existed. And Muslims and others should know that once they were finished with the Jews, it wouldn't have been long before they turned to Muslims. They murdered Slavs, they murdered anyone that they regarded as Untermensch, subhuman. And the Jews were the easiest and most tempting target because of the sheer number of those in Germany when Hitler came to power. It is a grotesque thing to call in any way in aid the ideas of Hitlerism or fascism when dealing with the monstrosity of Netanyahu and the actions of the Israeli state. That's number one. Number two, it's often a trap. The Hasbara, the public diplomacy, as it's euphemistically called, professional and voluntary, though we now know in the last few weeks students have been paid a stipend to join in this public diplomacy on social media and so on. It is one of their principal tactics to lure their critics into a position where they can be described as anti-Semites. And so some, I don't know how many, some of these provocations are being actually mounted by people whose principal purpose is to defend the crimes of Israel and, if possible, to get you to identify with the hateful anti-Semitic imagery and words that they put out. In my case, I have to be extremely vigilant. I have now more than 500,000 people following me on social media. All it needs is one person to put up such a post, and I don't see it, or my comrades don't see it, perhaps for a few days, maybe not at all in the sheer scale of the traffic, and before you know it, you have a story that somebody posted a picture of Hitler on my site and I left it there, somehow endorsing it by having left it there. So please, be on your guard about any such talk, any such provocations. Not just because they are wrong and they could not be more wrong, but because they may even be a trap designed to strengthen, not weaken, Netanyahu and the Zionist gang who are carrying out these atrocities. I put it this way: this is not the Holocaust. 1,000 people is horrific, but it is not the Holocaust. The Holocaust involved millions upon millions of people, perhaps 10 millions or more, well over half of them Jews, systematically, industrially, building factories in order to annihilate people, and with a clear and defined genocidal purpose. This is not the Holocaust. And Israel are not the Nazis, but they are behaving like Nazis. In this current conflict, the dark heart of Zionism and its ideology and practice has been exposed. And I said during Cast Lead, and I'm saying it again now, and the furore about it during Cast Lead was great. The furore about it now is not, because it's kind of obvious. This may not be and is not the Holocaust, but it is the Warsaw Ghetto. In fact, it's the Warsaw Ghetto in almost every particular. The Nazis built a ghetto in Warsaw, surrounded it by barbed wire and guards with dogs, and allowed the people inside to waste away and starve, and to will the contraction of fatal disease which began one by one to wipe out the Jews entrapped in the Warsaw Ghetto. Deciding that they would rather die on their feet than die one by one on their knees or their bed, or wait for their captor to come along and put them on a train to a gas chamber and kill them, the Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto rose up and wrote their name in the stars. The Nazis called them terrorists. They actually used that word. Everybody else regarded them as heroes, as freedom fighters. I maintain that the situation in Gaza is exactly comparable to the situation of the Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto. I believe that that is a fair comparison. The situation in Gaza has gotten far worse since I was last there, as you may know, during Cast Lead. Some of you may even have been with me. I led first one and then several siege-breaking convoys which entered Gaza and broke the siege, bringing material aid, but more importantly, raising the banner of Palestine all the way through the countries that we traveled, and lifting the spirits of the people entrapped in Gaza. And the situation that we found there could hardly be worse, we thought, except it now is worse. When we got there, we discovered something like 80,000 houses, schools, hospitals, clinics, public buildings of all kinds, including the president's residence, including the airport, expensively built by the European Union's taxpayers, schools and hospitals expensively maintained by the world taxpayer through the United Nations, hospitals and other facilities provided by the taxpayers of many countries and the charity givers of many countries had all been systematically destroyed. Thousands and thousands of people had been killed or maimed. Something like 65,000 people were homeless. The wreckage, the ruin, the smell of death was everywhere. And it was astounding to us that when we entered Gaza with our first convoy, in the middle of the night, thanks to the then Mubarak dictatorship, the entire journey from the border at Rafah into the heart of Gaza city, we were lined by at least half of the population of Gaza, who had waited up all night to welcome the foreigners who had come quite an arduous journey, facing many difficulties, most of them at the hands of Arab regimes, to which I shall return. They were grateful. We were humbled by the scale of the problems, the pitiful quantum of what we had been able to bring, and humbled by the absolute determination, sincerity, piety, and fidelity of the people in the Gaza enclave, the Gaza open-air prison, as David Cameron once, but only once, briefly described it. The situation now is being heaped upon a population that from the last day I was there, which is in 2009, so 5 years ago now, is in every respect worse. 80% of the people in Gaza are unemployed. 80% of the people in Gaza are living on less than $1.50 a day. 80% of the children of Gaza are either malnourished officially, according to the measurements of the United Nations, or undernourished. Every kind of problem is now and has been over the last 5 years since I was last there, multiplying. And the second point, therefore, I wish to come to is to help people deal with, they may already know it, but if you don't, here's the facts. When you are told that the resistance in Gaza is hiding behind the civilian population, is using the civilian population as human shields, when you're told, why are the weapons so close to the people in Gaza? Gaza is 25 miles long and 4.5 miles wide. It is one of the most densely populated places on the earth. There is no open space in Gaza. There are no mountains. There is no jungle. There is no place where the resistance could go, even if it were wise for them to do so. The resistance are the people. It's not an army. The Palestinians don't have an army. They have fighters who are living in this hellhole and bearing arms for the day, which comes often enough, when their hellhole is invaded, their families massacred. That little that they have is destroyed all around them. They say, why are there rockets amongst the population? The question is not why there are rockets amongst the population. Everything and everybody is amongst the population. The question is, why are there rockets? Now, I bring you the dread news that David Ward, my parliamentary colleague from Bradford East, has, after a day of rough treatment, no doubt, categorically apologized for the tweet that he made yesterday. I'm very sorry that he categorically apologized for it. And as I said last night, the synthetic rage of New Labour about what he said, which was, if you don't know it, if I was living in Gaza, I'd be tempted to fire rockets too, is identical, almost word for word, to what Cherie Blair said almost a decade ago. Cherie Blair and the Queen of Jordan, having heard the miserable stories that they heard, opined that the wonder is not that some of these people become suicide bombers. The wonder is that more of them don't become suicide bombers. That's actually a stronger statement than David Ward has now been prevailed upon to categorically apologize for. And both Cherie Blair and David Ward were merely speaking the obvious truth. After all, if you were living in Gaza under siege, if your children had been killed, might be killed, if your hovel had been, might be, destroyed at any moment, and you could see through the wire the very land which was yours and from which you were driven. Because there's another 80% in this story. 80% of the people of Gaza are refugees. They were never born in Gaza. They were driven to Gaza as refugees and are now imprisoned within it. And they can see many of them. They can't see the village that they left because that's been destroyed and new cities built on top of it. But they can see the land, that which was once theirs and their parents. What would you do if it was you? Would you take up arms against this sea of troubles and try, by opposing, to end them? Or would you what? Walk into the sea and commit suicide? If you did, you'd be shot before you got past shoulder deep. Would you simply lie down fatalistically and accept more than 65 years of this? Or would you fight? Well, some of you may be pacifists. I, myself, am not. And unlike David Ward, I wouldn't just fire rockets. I'd fight them with my bare hands if I could get my hands on the people responsible for these crimes. Write that down. Somebody will call on me to apologize tomorrow. The one thing you can be sure of, I'll not be apologizing categorically or otherwise for it. No, it's okay, brother. No, I'm fasting. So, learn how to quickly and efficiently deal with that charge. There are no human shields. There is no army. Palestinians have no planes, no anti-aircraft missiles. They have no ships. They have nothing except their small arms and their rockets. Now, their rockets are militarily, for the moment, almost entirely ineffective. Hardly a single casualty. I think one dead has been wrecked by these rockets. But they do show, as was pointed out in an article by a pro-Israel columnist in The Guardian today, that whilst still asymmetrical, that means one-sided, this military conflict is less asymmetrical than it was before, because now they have to scurry for their air raid shelters in Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem. The resistance has the distance. It has no targeting mechanism, has no precision in its weaponry. They're extremely primitive, but they can now strike anywhere in Israel. And of course, the resistance in the south of Lebanon has long had missile technology that can strike anywhere in Israel. So though, while still asymmetrical, as the columnist put it today, the conflict is less asymmetrical than it was before. And in parenthesis, reference to the resistance in the south of Lebanon, let me make another point. Whilst every Muslim in Gaza is a Sunni Muslim, none of the Sunni Muslim regimes have lifted a finger to help the Palestinian people under bombardment. Not one. Only 2 countries have militarily made it possible for the resistance even to have the bullets in their small arms, and those countries are Syria and Iran, whom Muslims are encouraged to hate, to regard as the devil. So if you are a Sunni Muslim in the audience tonight, think about that. Think about how utterly absurd that kind of deliberate division which some seek to open up. Indeed, look at YouTube and see ISIS the self-proclaimed caliphate which burned the Palestinian flag on top of a building in Aleppo just the other day. Because for them, there are no countries, there are no flags, and the Palestinian flag is no different to any other flag. I see one there. That's certainly not how we see it. So, as I go through these issues, put up your hands if you want to raise a question on any specific point that I make. I'm going to keep speaking until someone does. I want to move on to the media, or the mujahideen. It is a peculiar sadness that the Fourth Estate, the British media class, has become so debased, so degraded, that it would appear that they are entirely oblivious to the linguistic crimes that they commit every other day. I mean, Chomsky could write a book about the use of language, probably is writing a book on this conflict. It reached the nadir, surely, when on Fox News, where else? John Kerry, who else? The Foreign Secretary of the United States of America, the greatest, most powerful country on the earth, said, and I saw his lips move, he really said this: Israel is under siege from Hamas. And just in case you missed it, Fox put it up as a banner. Underneath, Israel is under siege from Hamas. What kind of madness is this? When the opposite is the truth. Some of it is so commonplace now that unless you're looking out for it, you could very well miss it. Palestinians die whilst Israelis are killed. Check it out. When you see it reported, you'll see that Israeli soldiers were killed whilst 25 Palestinians died under the bombardment. Speak up. Others. There you go. Even worse. Israel's operation is routinely, in fact, I think, invariably referred to as an action against militants, when 75% of the people who have been killed were women and children. How can a journalist write that? How can a journalist say that? They could say Israel claims that its operation is aimed at militants, but the vast majority of those killed are women and children, but they don't. They repeat the calumny that this is an operation aimed at militants. Just coming here on the BBC, I heard the BBC newscaster say, we'll have reaction to the United Nations claims that Israel has committed war crimes in Gaza. It's the United Nations that said it, for God's sake. I mean, who would have to write it for the claim to be treated as a finding? God? God claimed that Israel may have committed war crimes. Would it have to be that? Does any other finding by the United Nations get treated as a claim? Now, one of the reasons for this, my comrade Seamus Milne from The Guardian, who would be with us, except he's in Colombia, told me this long ago, that any journalist, including him, pauses momentarily over their keyboard before they type the word Israel or Israeli on their computer, because they know that automatically there will be an onslaught an organized onslaught of complaints, criticisms, distortions, misrepresentations that they'll have to deal with after they have done it. Well, of course, one expects that one's journalists would be made of sterner stuff than to therefore decline to do so. But many, unfortunately, are not. But here's an obvious area of something that we can do, because I'm besieged by people asking me, as many of you will, what can we do? Well, one of the things you can do is complain. And it works. Last Saturday, scores of thousands, I don't know how many, scores of thousands of people, you may have been amongst them, were on the streets of London, not a mile from the BBC, yet not 1 second of the footage appeared on the BBC. In fact, on their website, which only belatedly reported it, they had to show a photograph branded with the logo of Channel 4. So the BBC, the world's great broadcasting corporation, massively funded at your expense, didn't even send a stills photographer and had to use a picture from the much smaller Channel 4. We began, the leaders of the anti-war movement and the other organizations and speakers from the platform and so on, we began to highlight that. Indeed, the public were already noticing it. And they deluged the BBC with complaints. And I, as some of you may know, declared, I'll not pay my license fee. I refuse to pay a license fee so that the British people can be lied to systematically on my money. And a lot of people, a lot, are now contacting me to say either that they're going to do the same or that they have already begun refusing to pay their license fee. By Sunday, the BBC was giving the whole thing rather more attention than it had been on Saturday. It works. And at the very least, it will make you feel better. I'd carry no flag for Jon Snow at Channel 4 News, but he hasn't half put his reputation sky high by the way that he has reported this crisis. So praise people when they deserve to be praised, and criticize and attack their work when they don't. A lot of people are asking me if we can send more convoys. I'm sorry that we cannot, for a variety of reasons. First of all, the first convoy went through North Africa. Libya had to be traversed 1,000 kilometers. That's simply impossible now. In fact, no one knows who is killing whom in Libya, that great success story of the NATO intervention. Libya was pretty bad before. It's 10 times worse now. And nobody in their right mind would attempt to take a convoy across Libya. And even if you did, the regime in Egypt would stop you from crossing. Just yesterday, Tunisian Airways sent a plane full of medical supplies from the people of Tunisia, and when it attempted to land in Cairo, it was refused permission to land and had to make an urgent stop elsewhere before flying back to Tunisia with all the supplies still on board. And here I'll segue into Egypt. There are some fools who believed that the overthrow of Morsi was something worth celebrating. There are fools who told us with gusto that General Sisi was the new Nasser. There were liberals, even leftists, on the streets with the generals and the junta, cheering their support for General Sisi and his military junta. It is now clear that one, at least, of the purposes of the overthrow of the Morsi government was so that Egypt could clear the decks for this annihilation of the Palestinians in Gaza. Don't get me wrong. I think Morsi was a turkey, if you'll forgive the metaphor. I think he was a lousy president. I think he made every single mistake it was possible to make in just 1 year. But he wasn't overthrown for those reasons. And he wasn't overthrown by something better. And since Sisi came to power, he has not just massacred thousands and thousands of Egyptians, tortured thousands more, incarcerated tens of thousands, more than 25,000. He hasn't just sentenced to death hundreds of people at one sitting. At the last count, 880 people have been convicted and sentenced to death in Egypt for the murder of one police officer. Must have been a hell of a murder. 880 people have been sentenced to death for the murder of one person. He hasn't just done that. He has completed Mubarak's work of destroying the means of life of the Palestinians in Gaza, the tunnels through which they were being fed and supplied. But he has been a stalwart of the Israeli-American position in this conflict. Which leads me to another point that people ask me. Why did Hamas refuse the ceasefire that Egypt negotiated? Well, the answer is they didn't negotiate it with anybody, least of all the Palestinians, who are one of the parties to the fighting. They heard Israel's demands, they consulted with the United States, and they issued what they called a call for a ceasefire. The position of the Palestinian resistance is obvious. We cannot stop fighting while your siege continues. We cannot stop fighting at Egyptian instigation as long as Egypt is sealing the border at Rafah and trapping our people inside and trapping the means of life for them outside. This is normal. And not only did Hamas say that, but the PLO, which is dominated by the Fatah organization, which is the mainstream governing authority in the Palestine Authority based in Ramallah. The PLO and Hamas have both said that this conflict cannot end and a return to the status quo ante, because the status quo ante is death by 1,000 cuts. It's the Warsaw Ghetto. Which leads me to another point. Is it all Hamas? You've heard me say this before. I'm not a supporter of Hamas. I don't actually even like Hamas. I wouldn't vote for them in 100 years. But the people in Palestine did vote for them. And if we've learned one thing in our long imperial history, it surely is that the only people who are entitled to choose the leadership of any people are that people themselves. In any case, much of the resisting is done not just by Hamas, but by many other organizations, Islamic organizations like Islamic Jihad and others, and leftist organizations, principally the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which has a very strong presence actually in Gaza, more in Gaza than anywhere else amongst the people. So don't allow them to use Hamas as a shorthand in describing the Palestinian people in Gaza. Somebody just tweeted before I came in his picture. He said, "I'm in Gaza City. I'm hoping to survive. But if I don't, tell them I wasn't Hamas. I wasn't a human shield." I was just a Palestinian with the misfortune to be in Gaza. Most of the people in Gaza are not in Hamas. Many of the people fighting in Gaza are not Hamas. The PLO supports the stand of the Palestinian resistance in Gaza towards this conflict. So that's another issue that I wanted to deal with. Yes, sister at the back. No, I don't. First of all, yeah, I've got your point, but you didn't hear what I said earlier. There are no Shia in Palestine. There is not a single Shiite Palestinian. They don't exist. So there are no Shia militia, and I don't know what you mean by like Iran. But the first point that you made is a good one. That the Palestinian people have to unite themselves. And guess what? They had just done so, which is one of the reasons for the war. Finally, a national unity agreement between Hamas and Fatah had been reached. And the president was about to reopen his various organs of power in Gaza. Netanyahu said to Mahmoud Abbas, the president of Palestine, you can choose Hamas or you can choose peace. Laughably. But you can't have both. Well, Abbas did laugh, finally, and said, I don't see much peace, so I will have Hamas. Thank you very much. And a national unity government was formed. And you're right. It is absolutely vital that the Palestinians have only one address. When Arafat was alive, there was only one address, him, wherever he happened to be dodging the bombs and the bullets. Since Arafat's death, which was one of the reasons for killing him, the Palestinians have been thoroughly divided. And a house divided is a house gravely weakened. But that is over now, and we now have a national unity government. I wanted to come on to the proximate cause of this war. Seems a long time ago now. But 3 teenage boys, 16 years old, settlers in the West Bank, living near Hebron in one of the most extreme settlements anywhere to be found, were kidnapped and murdered. As it happens, Israel knew that they had been murdered only an hour or two after the crime had been committed. But they deliberately inflated a propaganda campaign. Bring back our boys. Whatever happened to that? Bring back our girls, by the way. Whatever happened to those Nigerian girls that Michelle Obama was so occupied with so very briefly? Bring back our boys was their campaign, even though they knew that they had been killed, murdered in a criminal act. They accused Hamas of having murdered these 3 teenagers. But to this day, they have not produced a single scintilla of evidence, even for the media, never mind a court, which places the responsibility for that crime on Hamas. In any case, whoever committed it, by definition, was in the West Bank. You can't get out of Gaza. So nobody in Gaza could have had anything to do with that crime. Israel immediately began bombing Gaza, and as you know, have now killed and maimed thousands of people. And of course, in the immediate wake of the murder of the 3 Israeli settler teenagers, a Palestinian teenager was abducted in Jerusalem petrol was poured down his throat and he was set on fire. Nobody dreamt of destroying the killer's parents' home. Nobody dreamt of carpet bombing the neighborhood where the killers of that Palestinian teenager had come from. Nobody dreamt of authorizing the murder of entirely innocent people elsewhere because of the cruel murder of that Palestinian boy. Yet it has been accepted as some kind of legitimate response that 3 children are killed in the West Bank so you can kill hundreds of children in Gaza, which by definition had absolutely nothing to do with it. I want to come on now to the things that we can do. We must continue these demonstrations. Another demonstration has been called for Saturday. It's vital that these demonstrations are big, and we have a reputation to maintain, and we want to show other countries, particularly Arab countries, where there are precious few demonstrations, the kind of scale of the uprising that's taking place in Europe and North America on this subject. Yes, the lady in the second row. Well, not every single person in here is extremely young. There's a pal of mine, John Bevan, there, who's even older than me. But it's true that the majority of people here are young, and the majority of people on the demonstrations are young, and that's our greatest asset. We have mobilized young people in huge numbers and all over the world, which is the reason I'm optimistic. You should not be pessimistic. In fact, when I started in this struggle in 1975, you could have fitted all the supporters of the Palestinians in the whole of Britain into this room and had room for several elephants at the back. It was a very hot potato indeed to say that you supported the PLO in 1975. Now we are millions, tens of millions in this country and hundreds of millions of people around the world. So actually, you have nothing at all to fear, because the media knows, even if it ignores it, the political class knows, even if for the moment they ignore it, the Israelis know that actually there is a giant, enormous swing in public opinion in the world, and even in the United States, and most importantly, in the United States. The movement for boycott, divestment, and sanctions in the United States is growing apace. Public opinion in the United States, even before this latest crisis, had moved into a position where a majority of Americans thought that the United States was either too close to or far too close to Israel. 55% said so. This change in public opinion has been going on since 1982. I'm in a position to chart that and testify to that. Since the invasion of Lebanon in 1982 and the massacres of Sabra and Shatila, the bank balance, public opinion, political capital of Israel has been running down. It's hard for you to remember, but some of us are old enough in here to remember when Israel was a really popular country. Left-wing people left university and went to go and live on kibbutz and thought that they were practicing socialism. We pointed out at the time that the kibbutz are to socialism as a group of thieves agreeing to share their spoils equally, but not many people saw it that way. Trade unions, almost all of them, had the closest possible relationship with the Israeli trade unions. And Israel seemed like a really hip, swinging, liberal place in an Arab world that people saw as backward and reactionary. In the 1960s and even into the 1970s, Israel was enormously popular in the world. Now, it is the most unpopular country in the world. And as I said on Saturday, people still move, yes, for Israel, but in Shakespeare's words, they move not out of love. They move out of interest, and interests can change and are changing. Even Kerry, just before he went on to make that ludicrous statement that Israel was under siege by the Palestinians, was caught on tape, though not on air, cursing the Israeli attack on Gaza. That's their real attitude. We have to turn that real attitude into their public attitude. Or just a year or two ago, maybe more, Sarkozy and Obama were caught similarly on tape discussing Netanyahu. And Sarkozy said, thinking the mic was not live, "I can't stand to look at Netanyahu's face, he's such a liar." And Obama said, "You can't stand to look at his face. What about me? I have to deal with him every day." That's their real attitude. And I happen to know, because long before he was president, I have personally talked to Obama on a demonstration for fully 25 minutes about Palestine. And he told me that the late and great Professor Edward Said schooled me, educated me on every aspect of this conflict. So he doesn't have the alibi the last guy did of being an imbecile. Obama knows very well what the truth is. So all over the world, public opinion is with us and swinging massively with us. And this horrific series of massacres and killings can only have hastened the day when the real attitude of our leaders becomes the actual public attitude. The gentleman in the front, yeah.
So, I mean, it's all good and knowing the truth and what is really going on. But, I mean, when is it going to be put into practice? And when are we actually going to have an Arab leader stand up for us? I'm not spoiled, Hamas. My family always from the West Bank. My nan's village is called Abu Dis.
I know it well, yeah.
Yeah, that's where I'm originally from. And we've been Fatah supporters all our lives. But right now, I don't see nothing coming from the PLO. And, I mean, the resistance is coming from the Al-Qassam Brigade, which is the wing to Hamas, the military wing. And we've got no choice but to support them because they're the only ones that are actually standing up for us and fighting the oppressors. So we're just waiting for the PLO, Abu Mazen to even say something or do something. But
Well, he has. I mean, I'm the last person to jump to Abu Mazen's defense. I can hardly believe I'm about to say what I'm about to say. But he has actually, and the PLO did endorse the stand of the resistance in Gaza in refusing this so-called ceasefire offer from Egypt. And he is meeting Kerry now, and I hope he is insisting on the terms of a military cessation, because, and you'll know this very well, when you're bombing people from the skies, you're shooting fish in a barrel. You're killing people who can't possibly fight you back. But once your soldiers go in on the ground, then you're up close and personal, and the resistance is done very well ever since this ground invasion took place. They have been taking a toll on the invader, and many of the invaders don't want to be there. Some of them are talking about it when they come out and saying so. One of them has been captured, and it will now be the new Shalit. So the resistance militarily has fought well and bravely since this ground invasion. And the PLO are supporting them, which is a measure of how things have changed since this unity agreement. It's up to the Palestinians to choose their leaders. I did not choose either Hamas or Mahmoud Abbas, and I wouldn't have voted for either of them. But the Palestinians have to get their democracy back. You see, Abbas, I'm calling him the president, he's not actually the president. His term as president ended long ago. Ismail Haniyeh, the prime minister in Gaza, is no longer the prime minister. His term ended a long time ago. In any case, the West Bank and Gaza are not all of Palestine. And the people under occupation or siege are only a small fraction of the Palestinian people. 3/4 of the Palestinians are not living under occupation at all. They're living as refugees in camps in the countries nearby or in exile around the world like you. And in the old days, before Oslo, the PLO represented all the Palestinians wherever they were in the world. And the political balance on the executive committee was carefully chosen to reflect the relative strength of the political trends within the Palestinian national movement. And that has to be done again. On your second point about the Arab leaders, I mean, don't get me started. It is somewhere between pitiful and unbelievable that not a single leader, not one, has been able to even bring themselves to say anything, never mind do anything meaningful about this catastrophe. Indeed, some of them are openly collaborating with the enemy in this murderous assault. Erdogan has made some very good statements in the last 48 hours. They would be more, he's the Turkish Prime Minister, soon to be President, they would be more credible if Turkey did not maintain diplomatic relations with Israel, have a military alliance with Israel, perform war games with Israel. And they would be more powerful if Israel was not getting its oil shipped through Turkish ports from Barzani's oil fields in the north of Iraq, in the Kurdish area. But nonetheless, what he has said is right, and it should be supported. But Turkey is not an Arab country, and Iran is not an Arab country. But they're the only two that are saying anything. Where are the Arabs? Where are the Arab leaders? It's not that this is just an Arab issue. It's not that this is just a Muslim issue. But you would have thought that Arabs and Muslims would be in the front line instead of Western public opinion in the front line. Yes, sir.
Dr. Lord Finkelstein says that Obama is often spoken against the Israeli acts, but he has had to stand down because of the influence of the Israeli lobby in the United States. So what can be done to weaken this influence of the Israeli lobby in the United States?
Well, first of all, Obama doesn't have to do anything. He's the most powerful individual on the earth. Those who argue that, you know, he's just a puppet and there's big forces and powers and so on that manipulate, that's just nonsense. If Obama wanted to, he could do so. Not least because he's in the second term of his presidency. He will never stand for election again. Why doesn't he actually secure some kind of legacy by telling the truth at least? A truth which I've already told you, he absolutely knows. It's not that he's ignorant of it. But there is, of course, an Israel lobby. And here we need to, again, make some important points. First of all, the vast majority of the people in the Israel lobby in the United States are not Jews. You do not have to be a Jew to be a Zionist. And many Jews are not Zionists. And you've seen the rabbis on our demonstrations. And there are many secular, and there are many secular and progressive and leftist Jews around the world, maybe in this room, all over the movement. The vast majority of the people in the Israel lobby in the United States are fanatic Christians. Fanatic Christian Zionists. And there's 60 or 70 million of those. And that's where their power arises. Because if you've got tens of millions of votes that you can mobilize, if you can raise tens, hundreds of millions of dollars for political campaigns, then you're a powerful operation. But of course, however many there are many more who are not. However much money they've got, if the rest of us put our mind to it, we could do better. Let's take Britain. Let's assume that 50% of the Jews in Britain are Zionist supporters of Israel. It'll be more than that, but let's assume it. 50% of the Jews in Britain equals 100,000 people. There's only 200,000 Jews in the United Kingdom. There's 2 million Muslims in the United Kingdom. Most Jews are middle class. Only a few Jews are mega rich. But of the 2 million Muslims in Britain, there are some of the most wealthy people in the country. And when you talk about Muslim money in Britain, I was once asked by a son of Sheikh Zayed, how come the Israeli lobby is so much better than our lobby? I said, we don't have a lobby. But within a mile of this restaurant, there are Arabs throwing millions of pounds on the casino tables in the gambling joints of London that could pay for 10 lobbies. In other words, the point I'm making is we mustn't be fatalistic about this, that they have all the power, they have all the money, they control this, they control that. In fact, every one of these areas could and must and is being contested, and it needs to be contested more fiercely. Because the politicians don't say what they must know to be true because they're scared. We've got to make them scared of not doing so. We've got to make them, that's why David Ward said what he said, because we're breathing down his neck in Bradford East, and because there are a lot of Muslim voters there. I don't know what they'll think of him now that he's categorically apologized. I know what they'll think of that categoric apology. But we have to make all these politicians scared. They've got to know that if they don't stand up on this, they can forget about our votes. They can forget about our contribution. They can forget about trying to recruit us to their parties. And that's the spirit and the mentality that we must adopt, whatever differences there are between us. I mean, frankly, you couldn't get a more divided people than the Jews. The Jewish political class hates each other with a vengeance that makes your eyes water. They punch each other in the parliament. They are extremely divided, but they're united on one thing, namely the interests of the state of Israel. And we have to get into a situation where, whatever our differences, we're united on one thing, which is the opposite of the thing that they are united upon. Let's take some more from the body of the hall. The young lady in the black dress, I think. Yes. Well, most of the angry young Muslim men are being seduced into other conflicts. I talked about the inability of a convoy going through Libya. The European route is also closed to us because it requires us to go through Syria. And self-evidently, we could not do so, not least because of the presence of several hundred, reportedly, young, angry, and extremized, radicalized Muslim youth from Britain and many other countries. So I doubt if there's a big pool on young people here in Britain to go and fight in Palestine. In any case, they would not be able to do so. they would not be able to get there. But I can tell you that there are a significant number of British Jews currently fighting in Gaza in the Israeli army. And I'm wondering if they're going to be arrested when they come back to London Airport for participating in foreign war. But you're right that we have to give people things to do, and many are already coming up with their own ideas. For example, a young man wrote to me the other day, he's organizing a car cavalcade on the Eid day for Palestine. A lot of people drove to the demonstration in convoy from different parts of the north last Saturday and will do again this Saturday. Local protests and demonstrations are being organized all over the place. People are raising money. They ask me where it should go. I always say Interpal. Interpal is the best of the charities processing donations that will get to the people on the ground in Gaza. And many people are organizing fundraising efforts, and I urge them to do so and to channel it through Interpal. There are also other mundane things. Well, they're not really mundane, but they can seem it. A young man went into Tesco's this week wearing a t-shirt, cursing the massacre in Gaza. Tesco's asked him to leave the store. Was it Tesco or was it Asda? It was Tesco. Asda. Sorry. No, I'm coming on to Tesco. I'm coming on to Tesco. Asda asked him to leave. People should not go to Asda, and tell Asda why. They're no longer going to Asda. Tesco's is already subject of a boycott because of the proliferation of goods on sale, often improperly marked, in their store from the occupied Palestinian land. And there's blood on their oranges, there's blood on their courgettes and other things that they are selling. You can boycott things yourself, and you can go and stand outside the store and try and persuade other people not to go into the store, and for the following reasons. Yes, the gentleman in the white shirt. Yeah.
Sorry, George, it's not really a question. It's just a kind of example to back up what you were talking about.
Go on.
Because I was doing it down in Brighton, and what we run was a really good campaign, the Palestinian Solidarity campaign. Because what happened was an Israeli shop called SodaStream, some of you might have heard of it, was brought into Brighton. And what was quite moving actually was the big response that we had from socialist, trade unionists, and Muslims, Arabs, everyone who came down outside it and made a big scene, said that this Israeli shop is not welcome here in Brighton. And after 2 long years of doing that, the sign came down and we made it clear in Brighton that, like George said, those products and those people who support that shop have blood on their hands and blood on their hands.
Very well said. Very well said. And as was pointed out by one of the speakers at one of the recent demonstrations, SodaStream, which thought it was on a real winner by engaging the lovely Scarlett Johansson as their face, have ended up virtually bankrupt because they drew attention, and her problems with Oxfam drew attention to the fact that actually their product is made in illegally occupied territory, and their share prices halved, and nobody wants to buy a soda. I don't know why anyone's still buying soda streams anyway, but their business has been wrecked by it. So we can achieve things with this. Yes, the gentleman at the 3 from the back, yeah.
Considering the sheer number of Israeli or Israeli-backed organizations in the UK, how feasible is it for us to boycott these kind of companies?
Well, you can pick and choose. I'm an advocate of the view that if you try to boycott everything, you'll end up boycotting nothing. So you can pick and choose products, but we should all pick and choose the same products if we can. We should try to mainstream particular targets. Somebody I saw had a great agitation the other day around Estee Lauder. Don't paint your face with Palestinian blood. Estee Lauder is a huge backer of the State of Israel. And there are plenty of other alternatives. Nobody has to buy Estee Lauder cosmetics, and nobody should. And these are obvious targets. I'm not myself the expert or the oracle on this, but there are plenty of places on the internet where you can get the best targets for a boycott. And the best one is obviously where the product is well known, where there are alternatives, so you're not asking someone to give up a particular thing altogether just to buy somebody else's rather than theirs, and which is a household name so that we can all rally behind it. But the point that the young man made about Brighton is a very good one, because I said this during Cast Lead, but to my horror it's still happening. In Westfield, both Westfields in London and elsewhere, there is still something calling itself the Israel shop, which waylays people walking by, often Muslims by the way, and tries to sell them salts and various skin products and so on from the Dead Sea, from the occupied Dead Sea, a Dead Sea which they have stolen. And I don't know why. I do it every time. They don't approach me now because perhaps they think my skin could not be improved. But I give them, and my children give them, such a dirty look. They stay away from us. But they don't stay away from everybody. And they get you talking, they sell you products, and they then tell you, because I've tested this using a willing volunteer, what do you know about Israel? Have you ever visited Israel? Have you thought about a holiday in Israel? And so on. Everybody who comes across these outfits should condemn them, should shun them, and should protest to the store. I mean, Westfields would actually collapse if it wasn't for Muslim clients. Yet they're allowing this pure Israel operation to take place in the malls. And that's an obvious target for a successful boycott, I think. Yes, with the bandana.
My question is, how can we hold the leaders accountable for their crimes?
I don't think you can hold them accountable in a court of law. David Cameron has a parliamentary majority. He's entitled, therefore, to set government policy. And well, I don't think there's any way we can hold Netanyahu accountable in a court. Israel is not a signatory to the ICC, and in any case, he's the wrong color to be taken before the ICC, because you have to be black and you have to be African in order to be tried at the ICC. I'm all for efforts that are made. We did successfully, Kate and Andrew will recall, get a magistrate actually to issue a warrant for, was it Livni and Mofaz, I think, two Israeli criminals anyway. We got a magistrate in Westminster to issue a warrant, and they had to scarp her out the country, but the government then changed the law that this could no longer be done. And they can do so because they have a majority in Parliament to change the law, and they did. Yes? They said, and this is the point I was making, that the BBC referred to them as claims. In fact, they weren't claims, they were a finding by the United Nations Human Rights Organization that Israel may be guilty of war crimes. I don't know where the maybe comes in, and I don't know where the description of it as a claim comes in. But I don't myself believe, there are others here who know the United Nations better than me, but I myself don't think that anything will come of that. Israel has been guilty of crimes, war crimes, crimes against humanity, human rights violations, and absolute defiance of the Security Council itself in dozens of cases and for almost half a century, and nothing has happened to them. So that will not change until the politics in the countries change, and the governments that make up the United Nations have to take a different line. And if you think that that's impossible, ponder the presence of His Excellency here. Venezuela was once a right-wing, reactionary, feudal, and often dictatorial state. Now, Venezuela is the hope of the world. Bolivia. Bolivia, Ecuador, Chile has severed relations, like Venezuela did 5 years ago. Chile has now severed relations with Israel and called for a boycott of Israeli goods. And there are many others where we're on the march and on the move, and we have to make that count in Britain too. Gentleman in the white top with the glasses. Well, well, first of all, we did not stop the Iraq war, but the movement that we built against the Iraq war stopped the Syrian war. That's the first part. So the reason we had a majority of 13 votes against going to war on Syria was not just because of the debate, was not just because of the petitioning and letters and calls and so on that members of the public were flooding in on the day of the debate, but because all the MPs, even those who voted for the war in Syria, had in their mind that the Iraq war had been such a disaster, the movement against it had been so right, that they weren't prepared to easily take the risk of doing so again. But the second point I make will depend on whether or not you're a believer. If you're a believer, as I am, then I believe that on the judgment day, I'll be asked what I did. I won't be asked what you did. And I'll be able to say, if I'm asked, what did you do when the Palestinians were being massacred in Gaza? I'll be able to say, truthfully, that I used every breath that I had to try and stop it. On the streets, in the markets, in the parliament, in every way that I can. So you'll feel better about yourself. If you're a believer, you'll have a better chance on the last day. And don't think that demonstrations achieve nothing. They may not achieve something today, but they definitely affect what happens tomorrow. Yes. Gentleman in the blue shirt, second from the back. This is a reference to the American quote-unquote comedian Bill Maher, who used to be a liberal, was one of the Christopher Hitchens brigade in the United States, and therefore portrayed himself, called himself, no doubt thought himself to be a liberal. But he has been, over the last few years, drifting headlong into more and more extreme Islamophobic and right-wing extremism. And I was provoked into challenging him to a public debate, pay-per-view. He could do whatever he liked with the money he raised. I'd put the money I raised into our movement. He has not taken it up. I was provoked by an exchange between him and the simply wonderful Frankie Boyle. Frankie Boyle has been... Frankie Boyle has weaponized humor in a way that I have never seen before. If you don't know what I mean, check him out. But Maher said, you know, dealing with Hamas, it's like dealing with a hysterical woman. You can hold on to her lapels, you can shake her, but eventually you may have to hit her. That's what he said, Maher. And Boyle said, in response, I hear you, man. It's amazing that some of these women, after you've bombed and killed their children, and destroyed their houses, you have to hit them before they hit you. It was a brilliant exchange, and I challenged Maha to debate this with me. I said, you seem to like slapping women around, why don't you try me on live pay-per-view television? Let's see who turns up. But he's gone to ground. As far as I know, he has not issued a single tweet since. But I'm looking for you, Maha. If you hear this, I'm looking for you. Gentleman in the blue top. Yep.
Yes. I've been covering the current massacre, and I've thought about it is social worker. And one of the most disgusting things I've noticed is that the support from our government isn't just words. Support is a lot more than that, because we actually provided weaponry to Israel. The latest report reveals that £8 billion worth of licenses, 380 licenses, are still excellent for Israel. And more disgusting is what those licenses are for. When Israel is bombing the Palestinians from the air, I want everyone to know that some of the contracts we've got for them are for military aero engines, for targeting equipment. When Israel are bombing Gaza from the sea, we're giving them components for naval vessels. So it isn't just words. A lot of the things involved in this current massacre, a lot of the components are going to have made in Britain on them. BAE systems? Exactly. So I think it's important to know that it isn't just words. There's a lot more support that we're actually giving.
You're absolutely right, and even worse, these licenses were issued after British government acceptance of Israeli government assurances that the weapons would not be used either for external aggression or internal repression. I wonder, therefore, what they would be used for. And I wonder how any civil servant with a straight face could have signed that off. Even worse, we're not just selling weapons to Israel, we're buying even more weapons from Israel. Indeed, much of the world is now buying weapons from Israel. It is one of the emerging merchants of death in the world, selling billions, tens of billions of dollars worth of weapons every year. Indeed, it's one of the things that's keeping the state afloat. David Cameron said, and I quote, that he stood staunchly behind Israel. Ed Miliband said on the front page of the Jewish Chronicle, I am a Zionist. Nick Clegg threatened David Ward with expulsion from the party unless he categorically apologized. Three cheeks of the same arse, as I always put it. And they will continue to be, unless they think that it will not profit them politically to continue on this line. Why should they stop? Think about it. These are totally unprincipled, opportunistic people. I mean, Ed Miliband isn't even a Zionist. I don't believe for 1 minute that he's a Zionist. It's even worse than that. He pretended to be. And he did so. People say to me, well, he's a Jew. So what? His mother and father were Jews, and neither of those would ever have described themselves as Zionists. Indeed, they would have defined themselves as anti-Zionists. That's why I'm pretty sure he isn't a Zionist. But he thought there was more in it for him to claim to be a Zionist than there would have been to state that he was an anti-Zionist. And that's the equation we have to change. That's the paradigm we have to change. Yes? Yes, madam.
Yeah, just going back to your point about the impact of demos, because back in 2003, they talked about an axis of evil, and it wasn't just Syria, it was Iran as well, and I think the big demonstrations stopped those wars happening. But I wanted to ask you something else, because you talked about the language in the media, and I think it's massively bound up with racism, and particularly, anti-Muslim racism, and it seems to me that was something, during the Iraq War, there's an enemy in Iraq, and there's also an enemy at home for ages, particularly demonising Muslims, and I think that's something that's continued when you think about everything that's been going on, Trojan horse, what's the community about with, etc. And to my mind, it's very important that we show solidarity with Palestine now, and in part, coming together on the demos cuts down some of those ideas that we're all divided, but also that we continue to stand side by side here, challenging the scapegoating and Islamophobia that they try and use to divide us from looking at the people at the top?
Excellent. Excellent. I couldn't put that better, so I won't try. Anyone else want to make a contribution, ask a question? Yes, gentleman right in the middle there with the greenish top on. Yeah. Well, end is a moot point. It's not going to end. It may pause. And it may pause quite soon. After all, now that Israel is losing, for them, significant numbers on the battlefield, in addition to the shock to their system that Palestinian rockets can now reach far and wide, Israel's much more in the mood for a pause than it would have been a week ago. And John Kerry has gone to the region and is engaging in shuttle diplomacy, you might say many weeks too late. So it's quite possible that there will be a pause, but it will only be a pause unless the siege is lifted and unless there's a political solution to this crisis. Then it will only have been a pause, and we'll be back here in a year or two or three discussing exactly the same things, which is probably a good point for me to advance what I believe is the solution, because some people say we're long on condemnation and criticism and so on, but short on solutions. Well, for me, and I've been in this next year for 40 years, that's a long time to be in a struggle. I have returned to the belief that I had right at the very beginning, that there is no possibility of this conflict being solved except on the basis of a single democratic state between the river and the sea. I'm absolutely convinced of that. The so-called two-state solution isn't a solution at all, and is in any case a chimera. The West Bank and Gaza are entirely distinct and separate geographic locations, separated by mainland so-called Israel. In other words, they are not contiguous territory. Therefore, a two-state solution which involved the West Bank and Gaza would have the West Bank and Gaza entirely separated by Israeli land. In any case, what was the West Bank has now been massively seized and settled by illegal Israeli settlements. And here's a point, maybe some of you hear this word settlement, you kind of think of log cabins and horse-drawn wagons and so on. These are cities. These Israeli settlements are like Beverly Hills, using sprinklers on their lawns when Palestinians can't get water, beautiful apartments given free or at hugely subsidized rates by the Israeli government, paid for by the US taxpayer. And every one of these settlements has Jews-only roads leading up to them, from which the Palestinians are excluded. All over the West Bank are hundreds and hundreds of checkpoints. There's the apartheid wall. There's the insistence of Netanyahu that they will never allow control of the Jordan Valley out of their hands. The more you talk about it, the more you realize that actually there isn't even the land left, even though it isn't contiguous, that you could have a two-state solution. But the most important reason why it isn't a solution is that it has no prospect of that man there returning home. It has within it no possibility of the majority of Palestinians returning home. Now, some people say, well, this one-state solution is pretty far-fetched, but so is the two-state solution. But at least the one-state solution has the benefit of being a solution. And unless the solution allows every Palestinian who's been driven from their land and their home to return, then it isn't a solution at all. And I'm not one of those. There may be some in here. I'm not one who say that the Israelis have to go home. Go home where? Most of the Israelis were now born there. Poland, Russia, France, England, America is no longer their home. They have a right to remain there, but they don't have the right to remain in somebody else's house, on somebody else's land. They'll have to be the ones who build a new city in the Negev, because they have to give back the land and the property that was stolen to the people from whom it was stolen. So, to me, as someone who was deeply involved in the struggle against apartheid in South Africa, I'm very clear that one man, one woman, one vote, that's the only basis that we can support any state. And it can be called Israel-Palestine, it can be called Palestine-Israel according to your point of view, or it can be called something else, but it will have to involve those with a right to return there being able to return there. And those Jews, and there will be many, in post-apartheid South Africa, half of the whites left and half remained. It'll probably be something like that. Half of the Jews currently in Israel will probably decide that if it's not going to be a Jews-only state, a state of the Jewish people, where exclusivist and anti-democratic practice is the norm, they don't want to live there anymore. Okay, bye-bye. Then they can go anywhere that they like. But the half that might remain might well find that actually that's a much better state to live in, a democratic state rather than an apartheid state. Certainly would be to me. Okay, I've got time for one or two more and then I'll need to wrap it up. Anybody that's not been in yet? Yes, gentleman in the second row.
I'd just like to know your thoughts on the timing of the declaration of the Palestinian Unity Government and this murderous assault on Gaza by Netanyahu.
I do think that the prospect of a national unity government and the horror with which Netanyahu received it is a major factor in the launching of this assault. But as Chairman Mao once said, sometimes the enemy struggles mightily to lift a huge stone only to drop it on its own feet. And if so, that's exactly what's happened here, because the unity of the Palestinians has been deepened and strengthened by this assault, which may in part have been launched partly because of that unity. Any more that hasn't been in? The gentleman in the suit there, just because he's wearing a suit, I like a man in a suit.
I'm going to wear a suit next time.
I mean, you might have already covered this on this kind of day, but what else do you think we can physically do? I mean, I think they have our support, they may well even know that, but what else now? I mean, I'm being questioned by people saying, well, you walk around, but they're still dying. What else can you advise us to do?
Well, I'm open to suggestions if anybody's got a better idea, but in the absence of better ideas, I'll be walking, I'll be marching, I'll be tweeting, I'll be Facebooking, I'll be phoning to complain, I'll be pressing in Parliament, I'll be trying to persuade turn people's opinions. Unless someone's got a better opinion, that's what I'll be doing. Educate, this is my maxim all of my life: educate, agitate, organize. And I think this meeting is part of that. Well, I should have mentioned that. Tony Blair. I didn't plant her to say that. I don't even know her.
Support your film, I've given you money.
Thank you. I'm very well on the way to producing a blockbuster 90-minute indictment of Tony Blair. It's a film called The Killing of Tony Blair. It doesn't... It doesn't involve me killing Tony Blair. It would be an even more successful movie if it did. But it charts the killings of Tony Blair, the killing of the Labour Party as we knew it, the killing of 1 million people and more in the Bush and Blair wars and the financial killing that he's been making out of both ever since. £100 million, 7 houses, outside of which I have filmed, all 7 of them. Some of them would make your eyes water. I don't know what the idea of 7 houses is. Is it one for every day of the week or what? We are on his case big time, and the film has now been taken up, pardon me, with a Hollywood distributor. It's going to be very big indeed on both sides of the Atlantic, and it will be launched, will be premiered at the International Film Festival in Austin, Texas, within sound of the ranch, Bush's Ranch, early next year. Thanks for giving me the opportunity, because I forgot to mention. Thank you. Should we finish on that note, I think, because it's almost 8:30. Those who are fasting have to get somewhere where they can break their fast in a little over half an hour. Thank you all for coming. I hope you found it useful, a kind of teach-in rather than platform speech. I hope you found that convivial. And if His Excellency agrees, we'll call another one soon. But by the way, this shows the power. Hello, Councillor, how are you? This shows the power of social media. This audience and the equal or more audience that didn't get in all came here directly from social media. Not a leaflet was distributed, not a poster was posted, not an advert was purchased. This is the future. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you.